You know what's strange? I was sitting across from someone once. Smart person. Good job. Confident talker. The kind of person who had an answer for everything. And I watched them walk into the exact same situation they'd been in 2 years before. Same trap. Different face across the table. Same outcome. When I pointed it out, they looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. They genuinely could not see it. That moment changed how I look at people forever. Because that person wasn't stupid in the traditional sense. They had a degree. They functioned completely normally in society. But they were blind to their own patterns. Today we're going through 8 of those patterns. And I need you to do one uncomfortable thing. Stop thinking about who else this applies to. And ask whether any of it applies to you. Because by trap 4, something is going to feel familiar. And that feeling? That is exactly the point. Trap number 1. They never admit when they're wrong. Let me ask you something direct. When was the last time you said, out loud, to another person, I was wrong? You were right. Not in your head. Out loud. For a lot of people, that sentence is physically difficult to produce. Not because they're lying, but because somewhere along the way, being wrong became the same thing as being less. Psychologists call this belief perseverance, the tendency to maintain a position even after the evidence against it has become overwhelming. And research consistently shows it is inversely correlated with cognitive flexibility, one of the core components of fluid intelligence. Here's what's actually happening neurologically. When we form a belief, our brain treats it almost like an object we own. Admitting we're wrong triggers the same threat response as a physical attack. The brain floods with cortisol. The defensive circuitry activates. Higher cognitive function, the part that can override that response and say, wait, I need to update this, requires deliberate engagement of the prefrontal cortex. People who can say, I was wrong, aren't weaker. They are operating at a higher level of cognitive control than people who can't. Every time you update a belief based on new evidence, your brain gets better at thinking. Every time you defend a wrong position, it gets worse. The most intelligent thing you can say in any room is simply, I was wrong. Tell me more. Most people will never say it. That silence is costing them more than they know. Trap number 2. They take everything literally. Someone says, I've told you 1,000 times. They haven't told you 1,000 times. You know that. But instead of hearing the frustration behind the words, you correct the number. Someone uses a metaphor. You respond to the literal object, not the meaning. Someone's tone tells you one thing. Their words tell you another. You follow the words. This isn't pedantry. This is a failure of what psychologists call pragmatic language processing, the ability to interpret meaning beyond literal content, including context, tone, implication, and social subtext. Research in cognitive linguistics shows that pragmatic processing ability is strongly linked to general intelligence and social cognition. It requires your brain to simultaneously hold the literal content and run a parallel process asking, but what does this actually mean in this context, from this person, at this moment? When that parallel process is weak or absent, communication breaks down constantly. Relationships suffer. Workplace performance suffers. And the person experiencing it often has no idea why, because from their perspective, they're responding to exactly what was said. Meaning lies between the words. Intelligent communication requires reading what wasn't said just as clearly as what was. Trap number 3. They can't see other people's perspective. You've been in an argument where the other person just won't see your point. No matter how clearly you explain it, no matter how many times you reframe it, they cannot or will not step outside their own perspective and look at yours. It's one of the most frustrating experiences in human interaction. Now here's the uncomfortable question. How often are you that person? Theory of mind, the cognitive ability to model another person's mental state, beliefs, and perspective as distinct from your own, is one of the most studied markers of higher cognitive function in developmental and social psychology. Research shows that individuals with stronger theory of mind perform significantly better on measures of general intelligence, emotional regulation, and real-world problem solving. And here's why it matters practically. Every negotiation, every relationship, every leadership decision, every conflict resolution requires the ability to accurately model what the other person is thinking and why. Without that ability, you are always operating with half the information. You can be completely right about your own perspective and still be completely ineffective, because effectiveness requires understanding the perspective you're trying to change. Seeing it from their side isn't weakness. It's the highest form of strategic intelligence. Trap number 4. They make the same mistakes repeatedly. Here we are. Trap 4. I told you something would feel familiar. So let me ask you directly. Is there a pattern in your life that keeps showing up? A type of relationship that always ends the same way? A financial situation you've been in before? A conflict at work that feels like a rerun of something that happened at your last job? Or the job before that? Be honest. Because learning from experience sounds automatic, like it just happens. But it doesn't. It requires a specific chain of mental steps that most people never complete. You have to observe what happened, without letting your ego filter the facts. You have to analyze honestly, without protecting yourself from uncomfortable conclusions. You have to connect your behavior directly to the outcome. And then you have to actually change something. That chain breaks for most people at step 2. Because honest self-analysis is painful. And the brain is very good at rewriting history in a way that keeps you comfortable and keeps someone else responsible. Psychologists call this failure of error-based learning, and it's associated with reduced activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for conflict monitoring and behavioral adjustment. Every mistake you make is data. The question isn't, why did this happen to me? It's, what did I do that I need to do differently? That shift, from narrative to data, is the exit door. Most people never find it. Not because it's hidden, but because finding it requires looking somewhere they've spent years avoiding. Trap number 5. They believe whatever they're told. Someone shares something online. It confirms what you already believed. It triggers an emotional response. You share it. You didn't check the source. You didn't ask who produced this and what their incentive was. You didn't look for a counterargument. You didn't sit with the discomfort of not being sure. You just believed it because it felt true. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning, the tendency to evaluate information based on whether it confirms what we want to believe rather than whether it's actually accurate. Research from Yale Law School found that higher numeracy and analytical thinking skills were associated with greater resistance to motivated reasoning, meaning smarter thinkers were better at questioning even information that confirmed their existing beliefs. The trap isn't being wrong about a fact. The trap is having a belief formation process that prioritizes emotional comfort over accuracy. In a world that is specifically engineered to exploit this weakness, through algorithms, through headlines, through content designed to trigger before it informs, the ability to pause and ask, but is this actually true, is not just an intellectual virtue. It is a survival skill. Trap number 6. They struggle to plan ahead. Next week arrives. Something goes wrong. And in hindsight, it was completely predictable. The signs were there. The pattern was there. If you had looked 2 steps ahead, you would have seen it coming. But you didn't look. Not because you're careless, but because forward planning, what cognitive scientists call prospective cognition, requires the brain to mentally simulate futures that don't exist yet, run them against current variables, and adjust present behavior accordingly. Research from the University of Cambridge found that prospective cognition ability is one of the strongest differentiators between average and high cognitive performance, and that it draws heavily on working memory, abstract reasoning, and executive function. People who struggle to plan ahead aren't lazy. Their brain's simulation capacity isn't being fully engaged. They're solving the problem in front of them, but not running the model forward to see what problem that solution creates in 3 steps. The question that changes everything is simple. If I do this, then what happens next? And then what? 3 steps forward. That's all it takes to start seeing what's coming before it arrives. Trap number 7. They react before they think. Picture this. A meeting at work. Someone gets feedback they didn't expect. And instead of processing it, they react. Visibly. In front of everyone. Voice gets louder. Body language shifts. Suddenly the feedback isn't the issue anymore. The issue is how it was delivered, who delivered it, and what that says about them personally. The room gets uncomfortable. The moment passes. But something has changed. That person just made themselves smaller in that room, without realizing it. And the worst part? In that moment, the reaction felt completely justified. That is the most dangerous part of all. Research in neuroscience shows that emotional reactivity, the amygdala's immediate threat response, is faster than prefrontal processing by approximately 200 milliseconds. Which means in a triggering situation, the emotional output has a head start on the rational evaluation. Closing that gap doesn't happen automatically. It requires a trained pause, a deliberate insertion of space between stimulus and response that allows the prefrontal cortex to catch up and do its job. The people who seem unshakably calm under pressure haven't eliminated their emotional responses. They've trained the pause to be longer than the impulse. That training is available to anyone, but it starts with recognizing, every single time you react before you think, that the cost of that half second is almost always higher than it felt in the moment. Trap number 8. They can't handle ambiguity. You need to know the answer. You need a decision. You need the plan to be fixed, the outcome to be clear, the situation to be resolved. And when it isn't, when things are ambiguous, open, unresolved, something in you can't settle, can't rest, can't function properly until the uncertainty is collapsed into something definite, even if that definite answer is wrong. Research on ambiguity tolerance, the ability to function effectively in unclear, complex, or unpredictable situations, shows it as one of the most consistent cognitive markers separating average from high performers across virtually every domain. Because here's the reality. Almost nothing important in life comes with certainty attached. The best business decisions are made under uncertainty. The best relationships require tolerating the unknown. The most creative work lives in the space before the answer exists. A brain that can only operate when things are clear will always struggle in a world that rarely is. The goal isn't to become comfortable with everything being uncertain. The goal is to build enough cognitive and emotional stability that uncertainty stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like the space where real thinking actually happens. Because the most important answers you'll ever find in your life won't come with a guarantee attached. And the mind that can sit inside that discomfort long enough to think clearly, that mind has an extraordinary advantage over every mind that cannot. So here's where I want to leave you. None of these 8 traps make you a bad person. They don't mean you're broken. They don't mean you're stuck forever. They mean you have patterns, cognitive habits that formed over years, sometimes over decades. And habits, unlike the intelligence you were born with, can be examined, challenged, replaced, but only if you're willing to look at them honestly. Only if you stop making this about someone else and start sitting with the uncomfortable question of whether any of this lives in you. Drop a comment, just a number, 1 through 8. Which trap hit closest to home? I read every single one. And if someone in your life is stuck in one of these patterns, share this with them. Not as a judgment, as a gift. Because awareness is always the first move. And the fact that you watched this far, instead of clicking away, that already tells me something about you.